Hello and welcome to another episode of Boring History, the channel where we get to spend some time together learning about all the random things that the majority of people just don't care about. I like to think of it as productive procrastination. Now, for today's episode, we're going to be looking at the Kobold. Mainly because something reminded me the other day of a German TV show I used to watch as a kid called Pumuckl. Pumuckl was initially aired on a Bavarian radio station in 1961 and then later went on to be a rather successful children's TV show. Now, if you're not familiar with German TV shows, you might be wondering what the heck I'm on about. So let's start at the beginning. Pumuckl looks like this. Isn't he adorably hilarious? Now, as I mentioned before, Pumuckl was a kobold, and kobolds are renowned for causing mischief and getting into trouble. I'll get into that more later, but for now it will suffice to say that this knack for trouble meant that poor Pumuckl was wandering around Bavaria lost, only to find himself in a carpenter's workshop stuck to some glue. Now, usually kobolds have the ability to turn invisible, which allows them to remain undetected by humans. Unfortunately, this all changes when they get stuck to something man-made and they lose that ability, meaning that anybody can see them. Luckily for Pumuckl, he gets discovered by the very kind Meister Eder and 90 episodes of adventure ensue. Anyway, enough with the background information. Let's get to the point of this video. What on earth is a kobold? If you're into Dungeons and Dragons, which I'm not, I'll admit, I googled, but in the game, they're represented as small reptilian humanoids who are rather aggressive and have the skill of building traps and laying ambushes. Which is interesting because in German folklore, they're actually a spirit, which although they're usually invisible, they have the skill to materialize as fire, animals, humans, everyday objects. However, they're most commonly depicted as a human-like figure about the size of a child. There are three main types of kobold. The first is the house spirit, who like to come and help out with the household chores. But before you get too excited, let me just warn you that they do have a tendency to play malicious tricks if they're ignored or neglected. But if you're still interested in inviting one into your house, I'll tell you the signs to look out for. Before a kobold sets up residence with a family, he does a test run of sorts to make sure that there'll be a personality match. First, he'll bring in wood chips and sawdust, and then he'll throw dirt in your milk. If the wood chips and the sawdust aren't moved or touched, and if the dirty milk is drunk, then the kobold will come and set up residence in your house and remain there so long as a member of the family is alive. The second type of kobold haunts underground places such as mines, and I'm thinking maybe this is where Dungeons and Dragons got their inspiration from. The third type, and incidentally, this is the type that Pumuckl was, is the Klabautermann, who live aboard ships and help sailors. The kobold in general is said to be the same as the Danish nis, the Scottish brownie, and the English hobgoblin, which some of you may be more familiar with. Now, there's also a bit of confusion, or it appears to be some confusion, about the origin of the word. The general consensus is that it stems from the Greek word for knave, which is given to us by the Greek playwright Aristophanes. If I can work out how to make Greek letters appear, I'll put them somewhere here. Then, when Wilhelm Grimm from the Grimm brothers used the word, he mistakenly wrote it as kobold, when in fact it should have been cobalt, which leads us to the word cobalt, which, and you may have guessed this already, means kobold. So, is there a link between kobold and kobold? The answer is yes. Cobalt was discovered by George Brandt in 1739. I won't get into how because chemistry confuses me. However, they did name this element after the mischievous sprite, who sometimes lives in mines, that we've been talking about. Why? Well, there appears to be two main reasons, neither from a particularly reliable source, so please feel free to correct me if you know better. The first is that naming this element after these deceptive little creatures reflected the fact that cobalt-bearing minerals were often mistaken for more precious minerals such as nickel or gold. So in a way, it tricked you the same way that a kobold may. And secondly, because cobalt actually caused the mysterious death of miners, so naming it after a sort of goblin of sorts seems fitting. Cobalt is a relatively rare element that is found in veins underground and can form combinations with other materials such as copper and arsenic. So what used to happen is that when the miners would heat an ore to assist them in releasing it, if they were unlucky enough to have found a stash that contained arsenic, they would also release a gas which would end up making them either really sick or worse, killing them. Well, there we have it, a very brief history of the kobold. I must say it's really difficult to find any reliable sources on them, so if you know of anything or you'd like to recommend some books to me, please feel free to let me know below. If you'd like a specific story about one particular kobold, also let me know and I can tell you all about Hinsenman, who's a kobold and gives us most of the information we have about the nature of his species. Anyway, thanks so much for watching and I look forward to sharing even more boring history with you in the future.